Hey, everybody, welcome to the 18 Strong podcast. We have an amazing guest on this week. We have Will Ahmed from Whoop, and Whoop is literally changing the game, the fitness world, and especially the golf world. We've been seeing almost every golfer on the PGA Tour wearing Whoop these days, guys like Rory McIlroy, Justin Thomas, who now are a part of the Whoop team, as a matter of fact, and hopefully we'll get some more insights into that when we bring Will into the show. So, Will, first of all, thanks for coming and joining us on the 18 Strong podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, man. It's Masters Week, and I know you've been to Augusta before. I was listening to your podcast with either Rory or Justin talking about being at Augusta. So first of all, how or when was it that you got to play Augusta? And just give me your first impression of walking onto the grounds there.
It really is the home of golf. I joke that they comb the squirrels there. It's like the most pristine vibe, and there's a little bit of a vibe. I mean, there's a vibe in the air when you're walking around it. I played in 2012. I hope to go back there again soon. And I think because such a memorable golf tournament, the Masters, is played there every year, you as someone who's playing the golf course just has like a deep memory of all these different locations throughout the golf course. And so, on the 16th hole, I just happened to have my shot be where Tiger chipped in from when he won the Masters, and I think it was 2009, if I'm not mistaken, that epic chip in on
Yeah.
16, and the pin was in the same place as when it was on Sunday, and so it was just cool to have the same, that same exact shot, and I totally muffed it, and he chipped it in. But that almost made it better because it just gives you this deep appreciation for how special it was.
Yeah. Now I know that you're very well connected with a lot of the guys on tour now. Obviously, with all the work that you've been doing, have you had a chance to talk to any of the guys that are there and gotten any insights into maybe a little bit of what's going to be different about the Masters being in November, obviously this year, and how the course is a little bit different, possibly?
The one thing I'll say is that I know all the guys are super amped up for it, and in maybe a way that is slightly even more amplified than usual. Just in catching up with Justin Thomas or Rory McIlroy, even John Rahm, they had all mentioned like, yeah, I'm just going to be very busy around this time preparing for the Masters, and I think that they're always like that. But I think given where it lands in the calendar this year, it just puts a magnifying glass on it for everyone. And so I can just tell that there's a real intensity going into this tournament.
Well, I'm sure you and I could sit here and talk about golf tournaments all day. I know you're a big time golfer. Well, first of all, how is the game these days? Before we dive into all of the Whoop stuff.
I think 2020 is going to actually be my lowest rounds played in maybe 5 years or something. Like I think I'm going to end up having played less than 10 rounds for the year by the time we're done, and so that's disappointing. My index is like a 3.1, so uh, I'm feisty.
So I know that you have a background in sports, played a lot of sports. Did you play golf growing up, or was that something that you picked up a little bit later on?
I did. The lowest my handicaps ever gotten was when I was 18 years old. I'd got down to a scratch, uh and like I said today, I'm like a 4 handicap. So I grew up playing, and it's a game you can play your whole life.
Absolutely. All right, so I want to dig a little bit into the background of Whoop, but even your background and how this whole idea started. I had a chance to listen to the podcast that you guys did on the Whoop podcast, which for all of our listeners, if you haven't checked that out, you have to go out and check out the Whoop podcast. But where did this whole idea even kind of spark from that has now become this global sensation?
Yeah, so just as some background, our mission at Whoop is to unlock human performance, and we believe essentially that every individual has an inner potential that you can tap into if you can better understand their bodies. And as such, we've developed technology. It's across hardware and software and analytics that is designed to monitor and improve your health. And I got into this space personally because I was always into sports and exercise. I was playing squash while I was at Harvard, and I was captain of the team there. And I felt like I didn't know what I was doing to my body while I was training. I was someone who used to overtrain. Many athletes undertrain, they get injured, they overtrain, misinterpret fitness peaks, don't necessarily understand the importance of sleep or recovery. And so for me, it was doing a lot of physiology research while I was in school. I read something like 500 medical papers, and I wrote a paper around how to continuously understand the human body. And I would say that became the business plan for starting Whoop. And started the company at the Harvard Innovation Lab and have been building it ever since 2012. And so today Whoop is about 330 people. We serve markets around the world. We've raised $200 million in capital, and we're growing into being a fairly mature business.
I would say that one of the things that when I first was introduced to Whoop and saw what it was, and I know that you guys have been around, I think it was 2012 that you guys officially became a company from what I understand from the podcast, but it was we're working with a lot of high performance athletes, maybe Olympic athletes. I mean, guys at the top of the professional athletic game. But now it seems like the Whoop is kind of world spread amongst everyday people too. And did you envision it becoming that kind of a commercially available item and having it as much popularity as it does?
We did. I mean, I always wanted to start with the best athletes in the world, really for two reasons. I thought the best athletes in the world needed this data the most. So if they are getting paid millions of dollars on their performance, they need to optimize their performance. And I believed a lot of that came back to sleep and recovery. Sleep and recovery are two of the things that Whoop measures better than any other product on the market. And I believe that if we could actually deliver that actionable data in a super accurate way, professional athletes would actually pay us to wear the product. We wouldn't even need to go sponsor athletes because they would truly see the value in it. And the second reason I wanted to start with professional athletes is that I felt if we could get them to love the product in a genuine, authentic way, it would help us create a whole brand around human performance. And both of those things I think have largely played out. It was a harder path. I think it was a longer path. But, if a professional athlete is wearing a wearable today, it's very likely that it's Whoop. I mean, we've really just conquered that market, and especially within golf. And so what that has done is show also the consumer market that Whoop is the best technology, for high-end performance monitoring. And by the way, high-end performance monitoring doesn't just apply to professional athletes. It applies to people who are driven in their daily lives. Do you want to figure out how you can be a better executive? Do you want to figure out how you can get more sleep? Do you want to figure out how to offset travel? Do you want to figure out what's the best diet for you? What supplements you should be taking? These are all the sorts of things that Whoop helps an individual optimize. And so the majority of our members on Whoop today are not athletes. They're everyday consumers. These are executives, doctors, cops, firemen, lawyers, students, mothers to be, you name it. And really, I think what holds this audience together is that it's aspirational. It's a group of people that is driven to be a slightly better version of themselves. And I think Whoop is very good at helping individuals improve.
What I've really noticed is it opens up conversations for people, especially for somebody like me that's working with people on a daily basis, whether they're golfers or business professionals, but they're interested in their fitness level, like you said. And it's opening up conversations that maybe we weren't having before. A guy that is running a company is now like looking at his sleep stats every day. And then he's like, okay, what did I do? Well, how can I get better? And it's all of these little pieces that, they all add up for high level performance, but it wasn't something that any of these people even thought about before. But now, in a way, you guys have almost gamified it a little bit. And do you find that it's that competitive drive that these people have too that is really causing them to latch on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's this sort of eureka moment where you realize that feelings are overrated. You know, we're seeing this right now in a big way with COVID-19, where this idea that you could feel completely healthy and fine, but be carrying a virus and infect a bunch of other people, and it makes them super sick. I mean, consumer psychology is shifting pretty rapidly to recognize something that we believed 10 years ago, which is that feelings are overrated. The reason I overtrained as an athlete was that I kept telling myself I felt fine, but I would just push myself through a wall. And then eventually you get fitter, 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 and then you fall off a cliff. And so I always believed that feelings were overrated and that there were things that you could measure about the human body that could actually show you the status of your body. And when someone has that moment where they wake up and they feel fine, but Whoop tells them that they're run down, uh, and they realize, like, actually, yeah, I can't exercise today, or I am not doing well at work today. Maybe I do need to go to bed earlier tonight. It's permission to take a step back and to sort of reassess where you are. The opposite's true too. There's plenty of times where people wake up and maybe they tell themselves, oh, I'm kind of out of it today or whatever. But actually, physiologically, you look great. You've got a green recovery. Go get it. And so Whoop gives you that nudge to, hey, actually, you do need to work out today. And so I think there's something powerful about this idea that you can manage what you measure. And a lot of people intuitively will say, yeah, sleep's important, but they don't measure it. So how are you going to know whether you're any good at it? How are you going to manage it? How are you going to improve it? The same person who spends 7 hours in bed can have a completely different performance depending on how those 7 hours in bed are actually translating to sleep. There's someone who spends 7 hours in bed and 3.5 hours of it is quality sleep. And there's someone who spends 7 hours in bed and 6.5 hours of it is quality sleep. And frankly, there's not that many things you need to tweak to go from being the 3.5 to the 7, and so that's where I just think it's so obvious that continuous health monitoring is here to stay. I really believe it can improve society at large. It can make people healthier and make people live longer, more fulfilled lives.
I want to dig into some of the things that it's tracking and why these things are important for us. And I'm sure you've answered this question a million times, so I apologize for you having to answer it again. But for our audience, I think a lot of people that don't understand or haven't done any research on the Whoop, they think of it as just another fitness tracker, and there's a lot of different fitness trackers out there. What's the simplest way for you to describe or differentiate the Whoop from maybe some of the things like the Apple Watch or the Fitbit or other tracking devices like that?
Well, Whoop is designed to act as a 24/7 life coach. And so the number one differentiator between Whoop and any other product on the market is that it will actually change your behavior and improve your health. If you've been on Whoop for a year, you have a lower resting heart rate, a higher heart rate variability. You're changed your lifestyle in one way or another. You're getting longer sleep and you're getting higher quality sleep. And I think that that's probably the single hardest thing to do in this space, is to actually change people's behavior and improve their health. So that's, I would say, the single most important thing. There's a lot of stuff that's happening behind the scenes that enables that. So, for example, Whoop collects the most data of any product on the market. We collect data 50 to 100 times per second across 6 different sensors. So things like heart rate variability, capacitive touch, movement, respiratory rate. These are things that we're collecting an enormous amount of data on. And by collecting that much data, we're able to process it in the most accurate way, and then we're able to build layers of coaching on top of it. But the bottom line at the end of the day is that the product's going to help you improve your health.
What I've noticed is that, and I've heard you talk about this on the show before, is you guys collect so much data, but one of the hard parts is figuring out what to show people so you don't overwhelm them. Has that been a big challenge? And what were maybe some things what are some things that you guys are looking at that you probably shouldn't show the general public, or they would just kind of get overwhelmed?
Yeah, I say to our product team all the time, the more data we collect, the less data we should show to a member. I think that People don't need more information. They don't need more numbers. They need more actions. What do I need to do with this information? And I think that's another big differentiator between Whoop and other products. Other products tend to show you 10 numbers on a screen and say, figure it out. Whoop will show you one number and tell you what to do. And I think that's a very important differentiator. It's interesting, like this evolves over time. So, for example, respiratory rate was a statistic that we actually just captured in the background. Respiratory rate is the number of breaths you have in a minute. So, an average respiratory rate might be somewhere between 10 and 20 breaths per minute. And it's such a boring statistic that we wouldn't show it to our users. Literally, you have the same respiratory rate every single day, day over day. And so we didn't think it was important to show them. Now, when COVID-19 rolled around, we started doing all this research around respiratory rate. And the crazy thing is that we found that respiratory rate actually was a leading indicator for someone who had COVID-19. COVID-19 is a lower respiratory tract infection. So this actually makes sense that if you have a lower respiratory tract infection, your respiratory rate would increase. And we've seen this in golf. So Nick Watney was the first player to test positive for COVID-19 on the PGA Tour. And he actually tested negative on a Tuesday. And he'd been on Whoop for 10 months. And his respiratory rate was at 14 breaths per minute for 10 months straight. Right? Now, that's not a statistic you need to show someone every single day if it's the same for 10 months straight. But it turned out he woke up on a Friday of the tournament, and all of a sudden his respiratory rate had jumped from 14 to 18.
Wow.
It jumped off the page. And he had read the research that we had put out around how respiratory rate could be a leading indicator for COVID-19. And so he went to the tournament staff and effectively forced them to test him again. And they even said, you're cleared to play. And fortunately, they did end up testing him, and he tested positive. And he was able to quarantine and, as a result, not spread the virus further on tour. And the PGA Tour learned of that, and they actually procured over 1,000 Whoop straps for every player, caddy, media member, and staff member to help everyone understand their bodies during this unusual time. So that's an example of where a statistic went from being something that we collected in the background to all of a sudden we did new research, we learned something specific, and now we're using it for a very actionable thing, which is that if you have a very elevated respiratory rate on Whoop, Whoop will alert you of that. And you should do the research on it yourself, but we've shown that an elevated respiratory rate catches about 80% of COVID-19 symptoms by the third day.
Wow. I'd like to dive in, if you don't mind, on a couple of the other big things. You mentioned sleep already. I want to discuss a little bit of HRV, though, and we'll get into some sleep stuff, too. But I think that HRV is one of those things that isn't very well understood yet, or you guys are making it a much more broad topic for the general public. But can you describe what it is, and how did you guys decide that was going to be kind of the number one big thing that initially was driving a lot of your recovery scores?
Yeah, HRV, so heart rate variability, was this fascinating statistic that I discovered when I was doing physiology research in school. And it actually goes back decades. So, in the 70s and 80s, Olympic powerlifters, Olympic cyclists, they were using heart rate variability to figure out what kind of training load they should put on their body. The CIA was using heart rate variability in the 90s as a form of lie detection because it was able to show such nuances in the way your body was evolving and thinking. Atrial fibrillation, former heart failure patients, cardiologists have been using heart rate variability to predict heart attacks. And so I said to myself, like, wow, here's this really powerful statistic I've never heard of that is helping everyone from athletes to the CIA understand the human body. And I said, why isn't this more mainstream? Why don't more people know about this? And the main reason I gathered was that the way to collect heart rate variability was so antiquated. It required, $30,000 medical equipment that you can only find in hospitals. The electrocardiogram machine that you see in movies when someone's about to die. Unfortunately, it's like beep beep. That's the
Right.
machine
Yeah.
with all these photodiodes on on someone. Obviously, I'm talking about that out of a movie, but you're familiar with what an electrocardiogram is. And I said, wow, what if you could provide this technology in a form factor that anyone could use? And so that was, I would say, the big eureka around technology and platform, because I felt that if we could collect heart rate variability continuously, it could provide a fascinating lens into the human body. Now, at this point, your listeners are asking, what the hell is heart rate variability? So, heart rate variability is the amount of time in between successive beats of the heart. If your heart is beating at 60 beats per minute, it doesn't mean it's beating every second. This is a counterintuitive phenomenon, but it probably means that your heart's beating at, say, 1.2 seconds, and then zero point 0.8 seconds, and then 0.7 seconds, and then 1.3 seconds. And it turns out that variability of time between successive beats is a good thing. The higher your heart rate variability, the better, because it's a sign that your body is adapting to its environment. Heart rate variability is this lens into your autonomic nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system consists of sympathetic and parasympathetic activity. So sympathetic is activation, heart rate up, blood pressure up, respiration up. It's what's happening when you're thinking about something important or when you're exercising, right? Okay, that's sympathetic. Parasympathetic's all the opposite. Heart rate down, blood pressure down, respiration down. It's what helps you fall asleep. Now, when you breathe in, that's sympathetic, heart rate up. When you exhale, that's parasympathetic, heart rate down. And heart rate variability is measuring literally the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. And as a consequence, the higher your heart rate variability, the more a sign that your body is restored, rested in a great um, environment. And we measure heart rate variability all the time, but in particular, we measure it during the last 5 minutes of slow wave sleep. And the reason that's important is that slow wave sleep is when your body produces about 95% of its human growth hormone. That's when your body's literally repairing itself. And so every night we get this snapshot of heart rate variability, again, the lens into your autonomic nervous system, while your body's repairing. And by doing that night over night over night, we're able to create a control, which is to say, what's the baseline for Jeff? And by knowing Jeff's baseline, we can then tell you whether today's heart rate variability is higher or lower than it should be. And as a consequence, whether you're more recovered or less recovered than usual. So I just told you an avalanche of stuff.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what do you get, Jeff? You get a score from 0 to 100%, red, yellow, green. Should I go today or not?
Right.
And so that what I just described in a lot of ways is the essence of Whoop, which is that we do a lot of intense physiology work behind the scenes, a lot of algorithmic analysis. But then you, at the end of the day, get a color and you get a number and you get told what to do. And I think that's the power of the platform.
And when I get that number in the morning, just to clarify for those listening, you get a red score, yellow score, green score. Green is good, yellow is kind of in the middle, and red is bad, right? Very intuitive there. But I think there's also some misconceptions of what that means for you that specific day. It's not like, oh, I have a red score, so I better just totally relax, shut down, completely do nothing today. So what can we kind of divulge from some of those scores, and what are maybe some of the misconceptions that you're seeing people initially have when they first start with the Whoop?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think a lot of this goes back to what your goals are, right? If your goal is to be getting fitter, you may actually push your body so far that certain days you wake up with a red recovery. And that day when you have a red recovery is potentially a day where you don't want to take on one of your harder workouts. Now, again, if you're in an overreaching phase where it's a phase where you want to be training more, you may still work out on that day with the red recovery, right? But let's pretend you are preparing for the Masters, right? Which a bunch of these guys are doing this week. If you see a red recovery on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, that's probably not the day that you want to go spend 8 hours on the range. You know, it turns out actually your body needs more rest than it needs stress. And you're about to try to peak for something. You want to be the best version of yourself on that Thursday. You want to be the best version of yourself on that Friday. You want to ideally have green recoveries for all 4 days. And if you listen to the Whoop podcast I did with Rory McIlroy, he talks a lot about trying to optimize his recovery over the course of a weekend. And he'll say, like, you know, if he has a green recovery, it gives him a little bit more confidence going into that round. But if he has a red recovery, he just says to himself, well, I'm going to perform well in spite of the status of my body. So he's created a healthy framework around it, right? And so a lot of this goes back to what your goals are. I think for the everyday executive consumer, it just can be a check-in. It can be a reminder. Okay, well, maybe my body is it's peaking much more than I was expecting. I've got a really high recovery today. I wasn't planning to exercise, but maybe I should try to do something today. Or the opposite, you know, I'm run down today. I've got a red recovery. Maybe I should just go to bed a little earlier tonight, or maybe I don't need to have that second or third glass of wine tonight. It just helps create this feedback loop for you to be more optimal.
It seems, in my own personal experience, it almost becomes kind of your digital accountability partner to some
Yeah.
extent. You know, like just like you said, like, okay, I'm a little run down today. You know, should I go out with the boys tonight? Or, you know, I know that I'm getting up early to play golf tomorrow. I should probably get to bed a little bit earlier. You know, what am I eating for dinner? I mean, some of the biggest things that I've noticed, and you guys have talked about this to all ends on the podcast, is the impact that things like food and alcohol and your diet, your sleep, all of that, that those have on your body that many of us don't really pay attention as much or don't really realize the impact that it has. And I've heard you talk about this before, but alcohol. Obviously, we're talking to a golf crowd, and a lot of times alcohol and golf are mixed, or alcohol is consumed afterwards. What is the effect, or what have been the trends that you see with alcohol and the Whoop stats that you see?
Well, bad news up front. The bad news up front is that generally speaking, alcohol is bad, and it affects your sleep quite profoundly, and it can really negatively impact your recovery. I think most people intuitively know, okay, you know, if I have a number of drinks at a cocktail party or, with some friends over the weekend, and they wake up the next day with that little sort of tinge of a hangover or whatnot, they kind of know, okay, yeah, alcohol probably wasn't good for me. I think what most people don't fully appreciate that they realize once they join Whoop is actually it's like one drink, two drinks, even three drinks, even just within that range, it can have a profoundly different effect on your body. We found effectively that with each additional glass of alcohol, you were reducing your recovery the next day by like 10 or 12%,
Wow.
right? Which is pretty profound. But the other thing for people to know, and maybe this is a silver lining, is that it's highly personal. So there are certain individuals, for example, that have a higher recovery the next day if they only have one drink versus zero drinks. That's pretty interesting.
Hmm.
Maybe it's something about their environment, maybe it's something about stress reduction. But for those people, actually having a drink versus not helps them recover. That's certainly not the majority of people, but that's one group of people. There's another group of people. Again, I'll pick on Rory because he says this on the Whoop podcast, but he literally can't have a single glass of alcohol if he wants to optimize for his recovery. Even just having one glass of red wine, he says, dramatically plummets his recovery. And he's realized from Whoop that his body is more sensitive to alcohol, right? And I think that's just one thing that you get from wearing Whoop is that you realize what your body's sensitive to and what it's not. You know, for other people, it might be eating close to bed. People tend to underestimate this, but if you eat within 3 hours of going to bed, it can actually have a pretty meaningfully negative effect on how you sleep. And for some people, it's more dramatic than others. But that one is just as important as alcohol, in my opinion. And it's often forgotten as sort of important. And what will happen, especially for people who travel a lot, is they'll get in late to a hotel, and they'll have that meal at like 10:30 or something, and they go to bed 45 minutes later. That's terrible for your sleep. And so it's just understanding how all these things affect your body. Now, the quick hit tips on alcohol. Um, the the longer you drink it before going to bed, so that the longer the amount of time before going to bed, that's better. Clearer alcohols are better than darker alcohols. So liquor like vodka and tequila tends to be better than whiskey and beer from a recovery standpoint.
Gotcha. I want to go back to HRV a little bit because it's different for everybody, right? I've had people say, "Oh, well, what's your HRV score?" And it's not quite as simple as like a resting heart rate or a respiratory rate kind of a thing, where it's almost kind of level par. Can you explain what are some of the differences between HRV, or why some people's would be higher or lower, or is it simply just a different for everybody kind of a thing?
Yeah, it is a very personal statistic, and it's a little bit unlike weight in that if I tell you I weigh 180 pounds and you tell me you weigh 165, and a friend of ours tells us he weighs 200, we kind of like have pegged a story about what the person's body looks like. If you tell me your heart rate variability and your age, that's not entirely going to predict how healthy you are or how fit you are. But what is true is that if we take just your baseline HRV and we look at it over time, whether it's increasing or decreasing tells a pretty clear story about your body and your health. It's very clear that heart rate variability is something you want to try to keep flat or increase over time. And that's a sign that your body's getting healthier and it's getting fitter with time. Because as you age, your heart rate variability declines. As you go through periods of stress, as you go through periods of declines in fitness, declines in health, your heart rate variability declines. And so the most important thing for people listening to this is to figure out what their heart rate variability is. I think Whoop is by far the best tool for that. And then look at it over time. And they want to try to keep getting better. It's not that helpful to compare my heart rate variability to your heart rate variability. There's a bunch of genetic factors that determine why someone's might be higher or lower. But it is very important to try to improve your specific heart rate variability over time.
Regarding sleep, you mentioned the deep sleep cycle and how that's very much a physically restorative part of our night's sleep. And you guys measure basically the four stages of sleep. And I always love being able to go in and like click on and see like what were the different stages. Can you just really briefly touch on, especially the REM sleep and how that's different than the deep sleep and why that's so important as well?
Yeah. So here's the fun thing. If you ask someone who doesn't measure their sleep, how much sleep did you get last night? What they'll probably do is they'll be like, well, I went to bed at 11. I woke up at 6. I got 7 hours of sleep. It's like, okay, wrong. You spent 7 hours in bed.
Right.
Now, the amount of time that you spend in bed consists of time that you're awake, time that you're in light sleep, time that you're in REM sleep, and time that you're in slow wave sleep. The last two periods, REM and slow wave sleep, are by far the most valuable. Awake is obviously useless, and light sleep is not that helpful. REM and slow wave is where all the magic happens. REM sleep is when your body and your mind are repairing cognitively. So if you're in a high stress work environment, if you need to have great mental performance, which I think speaks from virtually every human, you need to be getting a lot of REM sleep. If you're trying to learn something new, you need to be getting a lot of REM sleep. REM sleep is also when you're dreaming, right? So some people will say, yeah, I can't really remember any of my dreams. I don't know if I dreamed last night. That's someone who's probably not getting enough REM sleep, okay? Slow wave sleep is when your body produces about 95% of its human growth hormone. And that's really important because human growth hormone is repairing your muscles. So people think they get stronger in the gym or they think they get better at golf on the range. It's actually when they go to sleep during slow wave sleep that their body is then repairing and again building on what they've done during the day, right? Because in a weight room, you're actually tearing your muscles. Your muscles get stronger when they repair. So all the value of the time you spend in bed occurs during REM and slow wave sleep. So if you're not measuring this, you actually have no idea how much time you spend in REM and slow wave sleep. And so let's go back to the person who spends 7 hours in bed. We've seen people who spend 7 hours in bed literally get 5 hours of light sleep. They spend an hour awake, and maybe they'll get an hour of REM and slow wave sleep. So that maybe it's 30 minutes of REM, 30 minutes of slow wave sleep. That's actually not a lot. And that's a very unhelpful 7 hours of your life that you're spending, right? On the flip side, you can spend 7 hours in bed and get 5 hours of REM and slow wave sleep, right? And the person who gets 5 hours of REM and slow wave sleep versus the person who got 1 hour of REM and slow wave sleep has such a life advantage on this other person. I mean, it's a joke. And mind you, there's very little things that you can just tweak to go from being a 1 hour REM and slow wave person to being a 5 hour REM and slow wave person. And we could talk about some of them right now, but the key is you got to measure this stuff in order to manage it. And sleep is like a third of our lives. And the idea that you could be spending 7, 8 hours a night super inefficiently, but only need to tweak a few things to optimize, that period of time to me, it's quite amazing. So I think you have to be able to measure this stuff.
Yeah, it takes me back to like my college days, cramming for a midterm or
Totally.
something like that for physical therapy school, and like staying up all night before a neuroscience test. And now looking back thinking, man, like getting good sleep, being recovered, being rested, I would have been so much better off in those situations. Playing the collegiate soccer, all of those things, you go out the night before, and you got some guys that claim that they play better, after going out. But, you look at these kind of scores and it's like, that stuff's totally inaccurate. Now, you mentioned there are some very simple things that we can do to boost our sleep and how we do that. Even with HRV, what are the most pertinent things that you would suggest to anybody listening that they could literally change today?
So I think one is don't eat too close to bed. Two is try to cut out the alcohol. Make your bedroom darker. Most people's bedrooms are too bright. If you can't make your bedroom darker, consider wearing a sleep mask. Most people's bedrooms are too warm. Consider making your bedroom colder. 65 degrees Fahrenheit is a pretty good temperature, but it certainly shouldn't be above 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Phone usage, screen usage, looking at television sets, those are things that you want to try not to do right before going to bed because they have blue light, which stimulates your brain and tells your brain to stay awake. So people who typically have trouble falling asleep or who have a lot of disturbances throughout the night, again, that's something Whoop measures, they tend to be people who are looking at their cell phones right up to the second before they go to bed. If you're going to look at your cell phone no matter what right up before going to bed, I suggest getting blue light blocking glasses, which are red tinted glasses that you can wear that if you just wear them 30 minutes before bed will help offset some of the things we just discussed. I think in general, making sure that your room isn't too noisy, making sure that the air is fairly clean. A big advantage if you can go to bed and wake up at a consistent time, so sleep consistency. We found research that showed people who went to bed and woke up at the same time had higher recoveries, higher heart rate variabilities than people who had even longer in bed, but at varying bedtimes and wake times. So it's better to go to bed at 11 and wake up at 6 every day than go to bed at 12 and wake up at 8 and go to bed at 1 and wake up at 9 and go to bed at 11 and wake up at 7, right? So again, this goes back to maximizing, your time, getting the most value out of your time. So just those things that we said there can dramatically improve sleep. I would also add that there are supplements out there, magnesium, melatonin. There's different things, even chamomile tea, right, that have profoundly different effects on various individuals. And there's not a one size fit all for the supplement stuff, but those are things that I really encourage people to experiment with, again, alongside measuring their sleep, so that they can figure out, okay, what are the few things that I should do to improve?
Yeah, the few things that I've really noticed for myself personally and with clients is especially the hydration, staying super hydrated. The alcoholic drinks, just like Rory was saying, just a couple drinks can have a huge impact. And the timing of eating, but also the quality of eating. The better the diet is, the more, vegetables I'm getting, the less salty, snacky kind of stuff. That definitely has a huge impact. I want to jump into kind of run a little low on time here. So I know that everybody here wants to listen or wants to hear a little bit more about the influence that you guys have had on golf, and maybe even how that partnership came about. Because I know that you saw Rory wearing the Whoop on TV. You didn't even realize that he was wearing the Whoop and using the Whoop yet. But how did that relationship with the PGA, was it kind of fostered by the COVID thing with Nick Watney? And was it an intentional dive into golf? I know you're a big golfer. Or was it something that kind of almost organically happened and then you guys really kind of jumped on?
It was an organic thing to start. I mean, golf as a sport is actually surprisingly collaborative. You look at other sports and say tennis, for example, which is also an individual sport, Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal are not trading tips on how to be better tennis players, right? They're competing against each other, and their mindset is to beat each other. Professional golfers have more of a mindset that they're competing against the course or they're competing against themselves, right? Their win rates, even for the very best players on tour, is still pretty low, like the percentage of time that they're going to win a tournament. And so they really view it as, how can I just be the best version of myself for this tournament? And that's a very Whoop mindset. And it turns out that the best golfers who got on Whoop first also started telling other players on tour to wear Whoop. And like Rory was one of the first guys wearing it, and he actually told a bunch of people on tour to try it. He didn't keep it as a secret to himself. He wanted to tell Justin Thomas, for example, to wear it. And then Justin's, fell in love with it. I think got Dustin Johnson and Ricky Fowler on it. And so it just sort of grew organically within the tour. And then what happened with Nick Watney was a real catalyst where Whoop helped Nick Watney detect that he had COVID-19. And it became also part of the bubble protocol for making sure that these guys felt safe during COVID and understood their bodies. And so, it's been very cool for me. I've gone into a few of these tournaments in the bubble, and it's like joining a country club with 150 of the best golfers in the world.
Right.
You're just sitting in the clubhouse with, literally all the best golfers in the world, and there's no one else there. But as a result, I've gotten to spend a fair amount of time with these guys and talk to them about Whoop and their data. And the interesting thing, again, this goes back to the culture of the PGA Tour. They're pretty collaborative about it. I remember having breakfast one morning with I think it was John Rahm and Tony Finau, and they were just showing each other their Whoop profiles and like literally sharing each other's phones. And John couldn't believe that Tony had gotten like 9 hours and 38 minutes of sleep the night before, and Tony was giving John a hard time about his REM sleep and why it was too low, and John was asking for tips on how to improve his REM sleep. And so it was this sort of naturally authentic conversation around how can we improve our bodies. And I think it also speaks to the fact that golf is it is really a game in which the other 20 hours of the day matter just as much as what happens on the golf course. These guys are realizing that their mindset, their sleep, their recovery, their diet, these things are playing a big role in how they play. and the 100th best golfer in the world from a skills standpoint is right there with the best golfer in the world. And so it's making sure that they're optimizing all the little things that they can.
I'm curious with all these athletes, across the board on all of the different sports, but especially even with the golfers. And now I saw that Rory and Justin Thomas are now invested in the company. What kind of feedback do you get from them, and how do you take that? And has there been anything that you guys have changed based on feedback from the athletes that you work with over the last couple of years?
I think the biggest thing is just hearing from them, what are guys understanding easily? What might guys need more feedback on? We're also at a phase where we're doing a lot of partnerships in and around golf, and so just getting their feedback on different companies, different products is very helpful. I've had to do a few things directly with the PGA Tour, and so getting feedback from a Rory or a Justin on the best way to approach those things has certainly been helpful for me as a business leader and a CEO. And I think a lot of this goes back to our mission, right, around owning human performance. The fact that we're not creating sponsorship deals with all these athletes, but rather they're wearing the product because they get value out of it. And in fact, some of the best athletes in the world are investing in Whoop because they believe so strongly in the technology and the company. I think it really speaks to that mission.
I'm just curious on a personal level. You've had a chance to work with some of the best athletes in the world. I'm sure you've had a chance to work with some of the best business minds in the world. And obviously you guys are literally changing the landscape of fitness. But what's one or two things that you've really taken from being able to spend some time with these, high performance individuals? Obviously you're one yourself, but what's something that you've really noticed that is almost kind of a running theme throughout many of these high performing athletes?
I've found that the very, very best, and when I say very best, I mean like the number ones of the world, or top fives of the world in their respective sports. I've found that they have a pretty deep humility when it comes to what are things that I can do to be a little better. I mean, these are people that are obsessed, and I truly mean obsessed, with figuring out how can I get a fraction of a percentage better. And they know that that's the difference between them and everyone who's chasing them. And so, and again, I use the word humility. I think they are constantly looking for little things that they can do. And so I've found that they're remarkably open-minded for people who are best in class. I mean, this is an amazing thing, but in 2015, there were about 100 Whoop straps in the world, and two of them were being worn by Michael Phelps and LeBron James. I mean, think about that. Those are two of the best athletes of all time trying a fairly experimental technology at that time. And it was super validating for us that they were willing to wear Whoop because it showed that we were onto something, right? But again, it speaks to that humility. It speaks to the fact that, even how good these guys are, they're not saying I have all the answers. They're saying, what else is there? What else is there? What else is there?
That's awesome. Well, Will, I could spend hours and hours asking you more details about just the whole journey of Whoop, and maybe hopefully we'll have a chance to do this again at some point. But I want to close up. I want to honor your time and give you a few of the questions we like to ask everybody that comes on the show, just to have a little fun. As a golf fan yourself, I got to know Caddyshack or Happy Gilmore?
I am going to go with Happy Gilmore. Yeah. Love that movie.
If you could pick a walk-up song to the first tee box, let's say the first tee box of the Masters, if you were playing, what would your walk-up song be?
Well, it's funny. Sometimes when I'm hitting balls on the range, I listen to Kanye, but I think that that's not actually the right mindset for golf. It's more of just like screwing around. And so I think at the Masters, you need to have some kind of like Mozart playing in the background.
Love it. Now, I know you've probably had a chance to play golf with some pretty interesting individuals, but if you could pick three people to round out a foursome, it could be anybody, past or present, who would that be, and where would you choose to play?
Wow, that's a fun question. Okay, so Tiger Woods is the all-time greatest golfer in my opinion, so I would have to have Tiger in the round. Um, I think that Michael Jordan is my all-time favorite athlete, so I'd have to have him in the round. And I would say Barack Obama, who I think is an incredibly inspirational figure. So that would be a pretty fun round. And I feel like it'd be me and MJ versus Tiger and Obama, just from a handicap standpoint, which in itself is kind of a fun pairing.
And where would you guys play?
I would say Augusta.
Yeah, it's hard to not pick Augusta. Have you had a
Yeah.
chance? Have you
I
had
don't
a
know.
chance to?
What would be your second pick if it wasn't Augusta?
Oh, I mean, I've heard nothing but incredible things about Cypress Point.
Yeah, I think Cypress is up there. Um,
What's
there's a few courses I've never played that I would want to play too, but
what's one of
uh,
your most memorable courses you've been to, like where you're just blown away? Is there one that sticks out?
I mean, there's a few courses that come to mind. I think one that's underrated is Seminole. I mean, that's maybe a top 20 golf course or top 30 golf course in the U.S., but I mean, it's as good as any golf course I've ever seen. Um, yeah, that's the first one that came to mind.
All right, and I got to ask you, since I'm a guy living in St. Louis in Missouri, have you been down to the courses in Branson, down at the Big Cedar?
I haven't. Again, I haven't been playing enough golf recently too, so I'm about to start playing maybe some golf in the next 12 months.
I didn't know if you maybe had a chance to go to the match with Tiger and JT and all those guys down there, but that place, that's worth putting on your list for sure.
Yeah, that looked awesome.
All right, last question. It seems like you are a guy that obviously, like the guys that you were describing, always looking for ways to get better, always searching out new information. Is there a book or even a podcast or some sort of educational piece that you would recommend to our audience, either golf-wise or just something that has really struck you as a very valuable piece of information?
I got a lot personally out of reading Phil Knight's book, Shoe Dog. Phil Knight being the founder of Nike, and Shoe Dog being the story of building Nike. And in particular, what I loved about the book is everyone today thinks of Nike with all these phenomenal professional athletes and this massive global brand. But he spends 2/3 of the book talking about the very early days of Nike. In fact, before he was even called Nike, it was called Blue Ribbon Sports. And he goes into great detail just how hard it was to get the thing off the ground, how many times they almost ran out of money, the insane focus that they had on that first sneaker, and the importance of that sneaker being the best sneaker and being the sneaker that professional athletes wanted to wear because it would make them the fastest. Those were all principles that or experiences that resonated for me in building Whoop.
That was a phenomenal book. I listened to that one on audio and just kept me captivated forever, but also kind of showed that like nobody has the game plan, nobody has the playbook, and he was just kind of learning as he went and making mistakes and running out of money and going back to the bank and all that stuff. That was fascinating. All right, I have to ask you because I've never heard the answer to this yet. Where did the name Whoop come from?
Whoop was like this viral word amongst my friends in college, and it was sort of like a stand-in for excitement or enthusiasm. People would say, "Hey, how you feeling right now? You got Whoop?" And like, yeah, I feel good. I got Whoop, yeah. And it sort of like was this expression for excitement, and it was a word that people said, remembered, and made them smile. And I thought, if you're trying to build a brand, what better combination?
Awesome. Oh, I have one guy that would be totally mad at me if I didn't ask, will Whoop ever have a clock on it?
We could do a whole hour-long podcast just on that question.
I bet we could.
I'm going to keep that as a cliffhanger.
I love it. Will, I can't thank you enough for the time sharing with us today, and really just for what you're doing for the fitness world, for just everybody in my industry, in the world of exercise, fitness, health, everything. You guys literally are changing the game. And whether you see your company as that or not, I mean, I see you guys as one of the biggest players in, making a huge difference in the way that people view the way that they live their lives, the accountability they have on a regular basis. So thanks for everything that you do, man.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it.